Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Deep. Great to have you with us on IMA's Shaping Young Minds program, which is one of our flagship brand events and uh, very well appreciated all over the country. We have done 77 such programs. This is the 77th one. And it's wonderful to have you here with us, talking to this group of young people. We have about 500 who have logged on to Zoom and over 1,000 who have logged on onto the social media. So we have a huge number of minds that you're going to influence today.
Wonderful.
Uh, just a quick word to all my young friends there. This session is meant for you to ask questions. You have a wonderful opportunity to meet an actual icon from industry. Don't lose it. Ask questions. I will be asking deep questions initially, and then I'm going to open it up to you. You can put your questions in the chat box, but do that. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I would love you to take advantage of that. So, with these words, while Deep doesn't really need any introduction, since I've had an embarrassingly long introduction, I'm going to do the same to Deep. So here goes.
One. No.
Well, there are 1,500 young people who have logged on, and I think they deserve to know you better. So let me start off by my interpretation of you, and then I'm going to question you, and you can, you know, actually tell us who you are. The quintessential internet entrepreneur, Deep has seen it all, the dot-com bubble and bust, and the subsequent digital revolution. Typical of startup founders, he's highly educated and has worked for others before throwing away a fat salary for the excitement of changing the world. And he has indeed done his bit to make this world the way we know it now. Towards the end of the last millennium, Deep chucked his cushy job at ABN AMRO to launch an American bowling company in India, a venture that failed to strike. Briefly, he went back to a job in the financial sector, but was charmed back into entrepreneurship by the magic of the internet. This time in the year 2000, he bet his own money along with a few colleagues and friends on solving long standing travel problems. And Make My Trip was born, and the rest, as they say, is history. Today, Make My Trip is synonymous with online travel and hospitality management. Moreover, he's mentored some of other successful startups, including 197.com, the parent company of Paytm. Deep has put his fame and money to good use and has co-founded the Ashoka University and an NGO that works on urban issues in Gurgaon. He's also a leader of the Indian tech sector and he helps the central government with digitization ideas. He was a prime driver of the development and deployment of the Aadhaar Setu app during the COVID pandemic. He's a member of the National Startup Advisory Council of the Government of India and a founding member of indiatech.org, a group that looks after the interests of the Indian internet companies. His success and savvy have been recognized and celebrated widely. EY recognized him as the Entrepreneur of the Year, Business Information in 2011, and KPMG proclaimed him the most powerful digital influencer in India in 2012. Travel organization TTG Asia declared him the best travel entrepreneur of 2012 at the TTG Travel Awards. Importantly, he is a friend of IMA and absolutely delighted to have him here with us. So Deep, we have over 1,500 students, probably more who have already logged in. Normally we do this program with one local management association, and this time it's the Calcutta Management Association which has taken the lead. And we generally have, it's a live session with over 1,000 students attending it in person. However, since it's the first ever digital format, we have students joining us and young people joining us from 18 cities today, including Coimbatore, Rajkot, Bharuch, Dehradun, Jalandhar, and Asansol, Siliguri, to name just a very few. Just want to give you an idea that, we have a cross section of audience from many different cities, but of course, Calcutta and Bengal make up a majority of them. So, as I said, for the Shaping Young Minds program, we invite those we consider icons to talk to young minds about themselves, their lives, what was their journey, what inspired them, what was the successes, and more importantly, what were the failures and the learnings from it. So I'm not going to question you on the Indian economy and how the pandemic has been treating your business, though we can touch on that. But today, our fireside chat is going to be a journey of discovering Deep Kalra and what really makes him tick. So, with your permission, Deep, I hope you're ready for it.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to thank you for having me. It's an honor. It's a privilege. I didn't realize you've done more than 70 such sessions. That's amazing. Congratulations, Aima. Rekha, you've been an old friend and also alumni connection. So it's really lovely and special to be here, and especially talking to young minds, because I think that is if there is ever a time where you can help give, I won't even say help shape, but if you can help clarify doubts. And I really liked your point about asking everyone to come with their questions. Of course, you will have to do the job of filtering them. We have an hour and we'll do our best. But yeah, this is the time, folks, all of you who are listening. I can hark back to the time when I was, starting out my career. Also, when I was starting out, Make My Trip. And I can tell you that I always had tons of questions and doubts. And I found if you don't ask, you won't get an answer. And what's the worst that can happen? When you approach someone, and actually, if that question comes up, I will talk about it. How even to build my board in 2005, there were some pretty big names I wanted to get on the board. And I did have trepidation. I did have fear in asking. And then I realized if I don't ask, what will happen? And actually, most of them accepted. So, you've just got to be, I think, outgoing, but be very crisp and succinct with your question. And that's also a stage setting for today. Be very clear with your question. Most people can take out 5 to 10 minutes of their time, 15 minutes of their time. But if you want an hour for busy people, it becomes hard. So be very to the point, be very specific, and have different questions for different people. So with that, over to you, Rekha, to conduct the proceeding however you think is best for the audience.
Thanks, Deep. So yes, we are old friends, old being the operative word, especially when you're in the midst of, 1,500 young people.
That's
But let's go back quite a bit. You know, everyone is looking forward to hearing your story from the very beginning. In fact, when you were their age. So tell us how it was growing up for you. Life was very different then for young people than it is now. I mean, I know because I'm part of your generation. Growing up was, I was telling the audience today that, this is a great time to live in because there's so much more that you can do today than you could do at that time.
yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning. Take us through a journey of your childhood, young life, school, college, MBA. What were your dreams and aspirations? How did you ultimately achieve them?
Yeah, sure, sure. So I might disagree slightly. I actually feel youngsters today have it tougher. And I try to see this generation through the eyes of my kids. So we have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. So I have some idea when you're in college, how you're thinking. It's very different. I think it's more difficult now in some aspects because there's just so many choices. Ours was quite unidimensional, if I can say that. There were fewer choices to make. So the most important thing for anyone as you're building your career, as you're going through life, in fact, is the choices that you make. So we will all have different cards dealt to us. We will all have different balls thrown to us. It's how we decide to react and what we decide to pick up and do. So it's the choices which will be your most important decisions you'll make through life. The choices of, in class 10, 11, are you going to take sciences? Are you going to take commerce? What college are you going to get into? Fundamentally, how much importance are you going to accord to studies? It's your choice. We all know that. I mean, you can choose to say, okay, I'm done with 2 hours a day. And some people can say, I'm not done till I get to all the answers and I'm going to be curious and I'm going to go deeper. It's a choice you make. It's a choice you make about, the colleges, like I said, you're going to get into. Of course, sometimes you'd say, I only got these colleges, but actually, the choices that presented themselves were a result of many choices that you made many years ago. So that's my biggest learning. I had a very comfortable childhood. I went to a really good school in New Delhi. I grew up here. I was born in Hyderabad, grew up in New Delhi in a private sector background. And I went to St. Columbus School, a school I'm very proud of in New Delhi. It was really a top and leading school then. Now many other schools have come up. fortunate enough to get the ICSE board and the ISC board. And why I say that is I think these boards really had a very good curriculum. And we were the first batch. I passed out in school in 1987. We were the first batch to have computer science as a board subject. And I have to thank our headmaster, Brother D'Souza, who was, iconic, very well known, and really did a good job. He's quite unwell now, but he actually taught us computers in class 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, and then ensured that it would be a board subject. So it was fantastic. I learned programming way back then. And then I went to the same college that Rekha went to. I went to St. Stephen's College. I did eco, but I have to share with all of you, I don't have too many regrets, but one of my regrets is not doing engineering. So I didn't get into the IITs. I took the JE, probably didn't study enough, but that's a choice I made. And maybe I didn't, I gave more time to my boards or to sports or to extracurriculars. I just didn't study enough for the JE. And I realized only when I took the exam how difficult it is. On the back of the board results, I was given admission in two very good engineering colleges, BITS Pilani and Delhi College of Engineering, which became DIT. And I, for whatever reason, at that point of time, I chose economics in St. Stephen's. That was a lot of fun, but I wish I'd actually done my engineering. I think it might have helped me more today. I was very focused at that point of time. Yes, I was a good student till school, okay in college, and I was very focused to get into a good MBA. So I took my CAT and I got into the IIMs, and obviously it's hard to say no to IIM Ahmedabad, and I'm glad I went there. For me, that experience of 2 years was transformational. It was transformational for two reasons. One was the quality of peers that you interacted with. We all thought we are cat sisters getting into that college. It was the most humbling experience to get into IIM. And it was the most humbling experience because you had toppers not from all over the country. You had all the IIT toppers. Actually, a lot of our batch was engineers. 70% of our batch was engineers, of which 70% were from IITs. So 50% were from IITs. And IIT I use as a as a euphemism for really bright guys. They were all types. And it was no surprise that when the honor list of the top 10, we used to be called ISCOLs, industrial scholars, of them 80 or 90% were engineers. So even in courses like accounts and in economics, which they had never studied, they would end up topping because A, they were fundamentally brilliant, and B, they were ready to work very hard. So it was a humbling experience. You realize your place in the world. You also realize a lot of these super brilliant guys, and many of them are very good friends today, are very modest and were not, there was no, sense of pride or swagger because they were so brilliant. They wore it very lightly. And they were involved in many extracurriculars. So that term, of course, there were some geeks and some nerds, but by and large, a lot of people were all rounders. They were involved in whatever they like, many sports, many quizzes, all kinds of stuff. And today we have a lot of fun thanks to WhatsApp. We have specialist groups in the batch, not just for a general group, but there's a sports group, there's a quizzing group, there's a nature group, there's a health group, all from that batch. And it just shows how multi-talented folks are. So for me, it was an eye-opener. Also, I'd been in Delhi all my life. It was an eye-opener because I met people from all different walks of life and different parts of the country. It was brilliant. And we stayed in a hostel. So really, those were two of my best years of my life. And thirdly was the quality of the education. Incredible profs, very well selected curriculum. So I think it was very transformational for me. I didn't harbor hopes of doing my own thing even then. Even at that point of time, in fact, I didn't take the only entrepreneurship course that was offered. I chose to specialize in marketing and finance. I did my summer training with Citibank. It was quite fashionable to get into a multinational bank or a top marketing company. I joined ABN AMRO. I worked with them for 3 years. It was a Dutch bank, 92 to 95. Enjoyed ABN AMRO, didn't enjoy banking. It was corporate banking. It was a little slow and dull for me those days. By the way, in 92 was just the beginning, folks, of liberalized India. So 91 is when liberalized India. Manmohan Singh as finance minister, Rajiv Gandhi as prime minister, their vision of opening up India. So India was really opening up. So there were a lot of exciting jobs. I think I took a call closer to, in about 2.5 years in ABN AMRO that I want to do something more in the marketing field, more exciting. And that's when what Rekha mentioned, I actually worked for this American company called AMF Bowling. Again, I had a couple of interesting offers, marketing offers, but I chose something quite different. It was challenging. It was very entrepreneurial. So I worked for this company. I was their first employee in the country. And then I had to set up their operations here. I can tell you 4 years I spent trying very hard to cultivate this market for this family entertainment sport called Tenpin Bowling, which many of you know now. Set up actually a couple of projects even in Calcutta, but most of them were in and around Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore. But the cost of real estate in India was just too high to support this. Pool tables, etc. All of that we were doing. It was very interesting. I learned all my street smarts in those 4 years. I tried very hard to make it happen. But then my panic button was not that I wasn't earning as much as my colleagues, honestly, my batchmates. That didn't really bother me ever. Thankfully, what bothered me was the learning had plateaued. The learning had plateaued because my boss sat in Richmond, Virginia, in the US. And my colleagues were, really learning, being challenged. Those in consulting were doing exciting stuff. Those in marketing were being posted all over the country, launching new products. Those in advertising were doing exciting stuff. Those in banking also, they were just exploding. This was our late 20s for us. And your learning curve is that steep at that point of time. If you're not learning, then there's a panic. So I thought I should join a company. I was still thinking of a corporate job. I thought I should join a company where I learn a lot. And I got a very interesting proposition to join GE Capital in India as vice president for business development for their retail products, for their consumer products. It was called GE Countrywide then. It's called GE Money now. And it was again life-changing for me because in just 18 months, I spent just 18 months there because I was bitten by the internet bug from two sides. This was 99, 98, 99. And in 2000, I quit. So on 1st April 2000, I started Make My Trip. So one, I was personally looking at the internet and saying, this is transformational. Many of you youngsters probably maybe were born or very young. You won't understand the internet, but you can hear it from your older siblings or your parents that getting onto the internet in India was a labor of love. You had to be on that dial-up modem. It made those funny electronic sounds. You can go on the internet and see what I'm saying. And then finally you connect it, and very often to get disconnected in the next 10, 15 minutes. So all the hard work, especially when we were browsing heavy sites, was done late at night when the bandwidth was better because it wasn't being choked up. So 128 kbps was great, but you effectively got maybe 1/4 of that. So it was interesting because even professionally, I was looking at the internet as opportunities for GE Capital. And that was actually my job, to find different ways to distribute our product, to look at even opportunities where we could partner. And the more I met folks like Sanjeev, who spoke, I think, earlier today, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Naukri was probably one of the pioneers in 97. Him I knew because we had many common, actually we had all our kind of alum in common. But he was senior, but I had attended some classes that he used to hold to help people get into MBA schools. So I knew him. Ajit Balakrishna of VDIF, who was an early mover. I was meeting him for GE. Coincidentally, our Bombay office and VDIF's Bombay office were in the same building. So I spent a lot of time understanding what they're working on, his vision, how the internet was opening up. And a couple of transactions. Selling a second-hand car online was transformational. Booking a holiday online was transformational. And I said, enough is enough. So I took the plunge in 2000 to go ahead and set up my own online travel company. I did look at other business plans, including online stockbroking, but online travel seemed to be the place, which was a good mix of, I think, heart, because I was very excited about it, but also head. And I would share that with a lot of you that whatever you do, you've got to be really, really, really excited about. You've got to love what you do. Automatically, you will give it your best. And if you don't, and I learned that in banking, it's very hard to sustain your best. Even if you're the most earnest, hardworking person, that extra 10 or 20%, which makes all the difference, will be hard to come. So once you find your calling, and clearly, and we'll talk about Make My Trip journey, it's been a hell of a ride. It's 20 years, going on 21 now, end of this month. But I couldn't have asked for more from the career. But I can tell you there were some very, very difficult times, which I'm sure Rekha or some of you will want to ask about. And those are the defining moments. Where do you call it quits? You say we are done, or do you want to keep going on? So I think one has gone through a lot of that too. So I'll stop here, Rekha, and then you can ask me whatever you like.
So I didn't know that you wanted to do engineering, but probably if you had been to IIM Ahmedabad and there were so many people from the engineering background, this is precisely where you might have ended up in any case.
Who
But
knows?
yeah, who knows? But you were, as you said, one of those pioneering entrepreneurs. Those were the days when failure was a dirty word. Not many people went in for entrepreneurship. A safe job was the order of the day, and you had one. Uh, Tell us what made you chuck it up completely for unknown territories at a time when failure was still not considered all right as it is now. You, I know you wanted to bring in bowling into India, um, and worked on setting up bowling alleys, as you said, which did not quite take off as expected. So you had earlier tasted failure fairly early in your career, so to say. Did that help? Was it something which shaped you as a person? You obviously didn't let it get you down, because you went on to build a super successful enterprise with Make My Trip. So tell our young audience here as to what made you move on and touch your dreams, and the importance of failure in your life.
Yeah, it's a great question, Rekha, and I'm glad you touched upon that point. And I think the youngsters should all think about this and be very comfortable with it. So, firstly, I think it's very easy to say that failure does not impact you. Failure does. It impacts everybody, but it impacts people in different ways. So, yes, AMF bowling was, from a business point of view, a financial point of view, a failure. However, for me, it was maybe my awakening, maybe, like I said, the place where I learned my street smarts. Some sort of way, it also meant deep down inside when Make My Trip was going through its challenges in the first, I would say, year 0 to 1 was dream year. Year 1 to 5 was trial by fire. It was trial by fire, and very quickly I can tell you what we went through. So dot-com bust happened. Our early stage investors, e-ventures, they wanted to pull out the money they had invested. We had to return the money. I had to buy back the company. So I could literally beg, borrow, but not steal. I had to find angels who could help me. And we staked everything. Went through 18 months without a single rupee of salary. And one could do that simply because, there was, I think there was some savings. Definitely my wife had savings. And I was just so fixated that we were going to make this happen. But more importantly, there seemed to be something we were onto. So I think it was a mix of head where I was looking at the numbers, the data. We were getting better and better on the crucial metrics. The crucial metrics being conversion. Are we improving on conversion month on month, if not week on week? Are we actually reducing our burn month on month? Are we increasing revenues? Are we getting higher repeat? I think repeat rate is one of the most important metrics for any business. Do people come back after trying your service once, or do you have to keep on inducing them with discounts, etc.? Those become very important metrics. So we were getting better. So the head could clearly see if we got fuel for another couple of years, the revenue line would intersect with the expense line and we would have break even. The other side was the gut, which I think all entrepreneurs need to have, the gut instinct that, listen, we are onto something. And the third one is the point that you touched upon, Rekha, which is if one failed again, two dots make a line, right? Two dots make a trend. So I think that subliminally, I can't say I thought of it with the clarity I can today because hindsight is 2020. That fact that if one were to fail again, it would mean that it would be almost impossible to try a third time. So you want to something, so you give it a bit more and you give it a bit more. And therefore, I want all the young folks out here to be very clear. If you start something and you feel you're onto something, don't quit too early. So my most important advice to any of the youngsters I know, or many of my colleagues, by the way, who leave to start their own thing, which is hard to let them go because normally they're among the brightest guys. And if they ask me, give us some advice, which is typically the question, I always tell them, don't go in with a 2 year time horizon or a 3 year time horizon. Go in saying, I'm going to do this for 4 to 5 years. In India, businesses take time to take shape. It's not snap and you're done. This is not Silicon Valley. This is not China. It takes time. Yes, things are getting better, but have the mindset of a long distance runner, of a marathon runner. This would say, I'm not going to quit till 4 to 5 years, which means do you have resources to last 4 to 5 years? Do you have that kind of stamina? If you expect something to happen in 2 years, the chances of it happening are small. If it happens, great, but give it a little extra. I'm a firm believer that many great businesses have not seen the light of day because someone gave up too early. Someone just gave up too early. They just said, it's not happening. Let me go back to a corporate job. So that's one thing. The other part is, yes, it really helps when you have a good education degree in your back pocket. And I tell all the youngsters who are from top colleges, and it doesn't only have to be an IIM or an IIT. There are excellent colleges beyond that. I mentioned BITS and DIT. Many of the RECs are top colleges. Many of the non-IIM MBAs, like I believe places like SPJN and all are just phenomenal, and we hire from there and they're as good. So I would say today a top 30, 40 MBA school in the country is good. If you're in the top 30, 40, you're a good school for sure. And again, that doesn't mean you can't do very well if you're not. And in terms of engineering, maybe the top 40, 50 colleges are very good. So, but fundamentally, if you have a degree in your back pocket, which is, this is by the way, only a degree when I'm saying talking about engineering. What about liberal arts? You mentioned Ashoka in the introduction. That's today considered a great degree because very young, very good, but a top place, or a CA or other professional degrees like that. If you have that, please use that degree as an insurance policy when you're, when you're staking out and doing your own thing. Don't use that degree as a noose. And that's a big difference. People, if they're from a very good college, sometimes feel, oh, because I'm from this college, I better go down the trodden path. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, it is not the trodden path. It is the tougher path for sure. It will have great returns if you do well. But don't always be afraid and use conform. You don't have to always conform. Entrepreneurs never conform. If you conformed as an entrepreneur, then you're never going to do well. Because by definition, you are doing something which is non-conformist. By definition, you're doing something, you're taking the road less traveled, as simple as that. So I would say, please use this degree as your insurance policy. And when you're young, India is still booming. COVID will be done. Hopefully in the next quarter or two, we'll see the worst of it behind us. Things will start opening up. In fact, the economy has come back. We almost had a flat quarter in terms of growth. This year, we could grow even 8%. So things in India, there are no dearth of opportunities. If you're bright and hardworking, eventually you'll do well. So have that confidence. So I think that failure at the back of the mind, Rekha, played a very big role. Could not afford to fail again. And that gave I think, the fuel or the stamina and the resolve to keep persevering through those very tough 4 years where we were bootstrapped, we had no money, we were living hand to mouth, month to month. And I'm glad one did, because that also gave you the resolve and the conviction that you can make it happen. And I have to call out the value of the team. So that's really important for all of you who are thinking of doing your own thing. I say it often, and it's really true. I was foolish enough to start alone. I was naive and foolish. I said, I can build this alone. I never even thought of a partner. I was just so convinced that maybe I have the confidence. Ye akela kar lenge. Then I was lucky enough to have three great individuals who joined me. And during the downturn, who wanted to support me, both financially and with cuts in their own salary. And they said, we don't want to quit. We want to be together. And if I can say I was smart enough to hold on to these guys, to make them co-founders in the right spirit. So I actually made 3 co-founders in the journey. 2 have retired, but they're still, hold on to stock. They're still friends of the firm. And one of them is actually the group CEO, Rajesh, who, Rekha, is one of those guys who had the conviction at that point to support the company. And the other 2, Keyur and Sachin, have been great supporters. So if I was to do it all over again, I think I would take 2 as the magic number for me. Not 1, not 3, not 4 for sure. I think 2 is the right number, where you go with someone with complementary skills. Yes, some people say you should not have equal partnerships. It should be very clear who's the senior partner, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe it could be equal partnerships. I have no problem with that. And you have complementary skills. So 1 is alone, 1 is lonely. 2 is a great sounding board. and choose your partner not only for complementary skills, but please make sure that you have common values. That's really important, a common set of values, because you will come on many decision points where your values will get tested. And at that point of time, you'll get to know. And this is values about fundamentally what does success mean to you? If one person says success means to be becoming a unicorn, and the other person says no, success means to be building a wonderful service where people love it, or building a great product where there's a lot of brand love, then your value system is slightly different. So money should mean the same thing. Success should mean broadly the same thing. And that I think can help create a really good company. Rekha, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some very key points you've made, and I think the young people who have joined us today should take those away with them. One is don't give up too early. The only question is what is too early or what is too late for some people, but then I guess everyone needs to figure that out. And don't discount the value of education. A lot of people these days feel, or young people feel, that they really don't need the education because entrepreneurship is perhaps the flavor of the day, so to say. So it's good to hear from you that there is still a lot of value for good education, and that's actually your backstop, and one shouldn't give that away. um, Not confirm, do your own thing, absolutely. Very interesting when you say that have another co-founder, have someone join you on your journey, because there are lots of times that you feel that it's better to do it alone because you're not sure whether you're going to, your values will match, as you said, or whether whether success means the same thing to both of you. So how do you ensure that? I mean, you don't really know a person before you so-called, tie up with them.
Yeah, no, you do. And by the way, Rekha, you're absolutely right. People feel that the education, I'm not saying it's a must. Some of the brightest and top entrepreneurs in the world were college dropouts. But let's not forget those guys really, really did something very special in life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were unique individuals. It's very easy to look at Steve Jobs and to look at Mark. Mark wasn't a dropout. I think he had a top education, but it's easy to look at a few names and say, oh, they were this, but they
Yeah.
were very, very different stuff, right? So let's be very clear. Let's not be delusional. That degree can only help you. The other place that degree really helps, by the way, the education really helps, is when you build up the company, when you scale up. When you scale up, it's very important that you actually get when you're attracting people and high quality people to come in. It helps also when you scale up, then you fall back on two kinds of education. And I want to point that out, and that's the value of work experience. So you fall back on some things that you've learned, even if later in life, if not in college. The other thing that you fall back on is what you learned by osmosis. So I'm a big believer that your maximum learning is by osmosis. And those of you who studied your bio or remember it, osmosis, you will understand, is again used as a metaphor when you're in the same room. So I learned a lot in these jobs by the seniors and the bosses and the brilliant people you were interacting with. And then willy-nilly, you fall back thinking, how would so-and-so have reacted to this challenge? What would so-and-so have done? So I think that's very interesting too. So keep that definitely in mind. You also mentioned how long is long enough. That's why I said 4 to 5 years. When something's not working, be steadfast enough on your goal of building a special company, but be flexible enough to try a different way to do it. So if you've got a pivot, it's okay. Don't be so stubborn that, oh, the world is changing, but I'm not going to change it. But be ready that if you need to, your goal is still the same. You want to build a great company, a special company, but be flexible enough that you can do different things. So different approaches. So I think that's really important. And while I was reacting on that, what was your specific question to this one, Rekha? I lost track of that. Okay,
No,
I
Mike,
think
it was more
have
of a
we lost
comment,
Rekha? We
but
probably have. Okay. Maybe what? Yeah, Rekha, I lost your specific question. I was reacting to your comments.
yeah. So I wanted to actually come to to make my trip,
Yeah.
and the specific, how it led to your chucking up your job. It couldn't have been a one-day
Right.
decision. It would have
now I
needed a lot
recall
of
what you were saying.
thinking. It would have needed a lot of strength of mind to say, okay, I'm going to chuck it up. What was that turning point which led you to say, okay, enough of GE, now I want to start my own venture? How did your family, did they have a role to play?
Yeah,
Tell us your
yeah,
story.
yeah. That and the other thing, what you said, how do you choose your co-founder? So I'll talk about both. So this is, I think, really important. Um, I think for me, like I said, at GE and during that time, the internet was truly beginning to happen in India. It was difficult to go online. There was definitely no mobile internet, guys. It was all desktop, laptops, whatever, and very slow. But what I did find, like I said, was when I met some of these internet entrepreneurs, it was pretty eye-opening for me. Also, when I was doing personal stuff, like I mentioned fleetingly, selling a second-hand car for my wife. Now, I went through the approach, what I knew way back then, which is I spoke to, one of my kind of friends who was in the auto finance line. I requested him, just help me find, a good buyer. And he said, sure. He put me on to some agent and they were quoting me something. And then I was tempted to go ahead and put the car on Automart India. I think that was Automart India from Mahindra's way back, 99. And lo and behold, I got a couple of people interested, and two of them were ready to come on that weekend, on Saturday, to our house and to check out the car. Both of them came. One of them was a corporate type and offered without negotiation 20,000 more than the best offer I was getting through the offline system. And I said, wow, something's going on here. Sure enough, he brought his checkbook. The deal was done. I'm still in touch with that guy. I said, something's going on. What is happening? And fundamentally, what was happening was the internet was disintermediating. The internet was disintermediating, and therefore, everyone in that supply chain, in that value chain, who wanted to make 5,000, 10,000 sub brokers. That's how the second-hand car market works, because someone picks it up here, checks out the car, then sells it to the big dealer. The big dealer then gets approached by smaller dealers from other cities. They take it there. So this was all disintermediated. We were going direct customer to customer, peer to peer. So that was the game changer. The other very interesting incident was actually a holiday booking. So I remember we were traveling to Phuket in July 99, me and my wife, and we spoke to our offline travel agent, as we always did, called him. The air tickets got done very quickly because there were very few flights that time. We were booked on Thai. We knew what we wanted to do, and that was it. There weren't too many choices. We booked. But the hotel kept going back and forth. And he would show options which we didn't like or which were too expensive. He even said, come to my office, sit with me, etc. I think we even did that. I was a pretty complex kind of smooth thing. There was a lot of friction. So I went online because I was already quite online for many things. And with some trepidation, I must say, I dropped my credit card finally on a site called asiarooms.com, Asia Hotel Rooms or asiarooms.com. I don't think they exist now. And the same hotel that he quoted was $15 a night cheaper. Over 6 nights, that was $90. It was a lot of money back then. We were on a very modest kind of budget. And we went, and I was scared that will the hotel live up to the pictures, the images, etc., or have they fooled us? Thankfully, it was more or less the same. There were no rude surprises, and it all worked out well, and we saved money. I think all of this pretty much just convinced me that, listen, the internet is not only here to stay, it's a game changer. Also, the time is now to build something on it. I could have waited. By the way, G job was great. Like Rekha said, it's an excellent place to work, brilliant minds all around you. Pay was very good. And I'd also convinced that time the boss, who's become a friend now over time, Pramod Bhasin, that we should build a GE India online business. And he even sanctioned $1 million to build geindia.com. But after a few months of seeing that, I was convinced that if you want to build a new business, particularly on the internet, it's got to be the only thing you do. It's got to be your raison d'etre. That's a French word, French phrase, which means your reason for living. It cannot be your Friday project or your Saturday project. It's got to be the main thing. And I think I basically was excited enough to take this plunge. Yes, I got a lot of support. I must say the family, wife, parents, they said, listen, if you're convinced, we will back you. They believed in my kind of judgment. And I went ahead and took that plunge. It was not that crazy then, because again, don't forget. So I was 30. I was definitely in my back pocket, had some nice degree. And more than that, uh, I had really spent a lot of time developing a business plan about this. So I firstly attacked businesses which were done on the phone, therefore online travel and online stockbroking. You never saw your broker, you never saw your travel agent. That was the reality. You probably met them once a year or twice a year on Diwali or something like that. Most of the time, what were you doing? Most of the time, you were basically talking to them on the phone, placing your orders when it was the, let's say, the stock market, maybe spoke every day. And to your travel agent, you spoke when you needed. I felt these businesses would move online first. Yes, India was very new to the internet. First 5 years, we really struggled with the Indian market, but the non-resident Indian market in the US kept us going. And like I said, went through many challenges, but I think taking the plunge was a mix of detailed work, definitely, but also conviction and self confidence. So I'm yet to meet an entrepreneur who doesn't have self confidence. In fact, the warning I give is don't have too much of it.
Don't be overconfident. Yeah.
Be overconfident. People tend to get delusional. No, be realistic. Confidence is important. Overconfidence is no longer a virtue. So, and your other point that you made about selection of partners when you don't know them, no, Rekha, I would say get to know them. It's like dating. You're going to be married to this person. You're going to probably spend 10 years, 20 years together. You're going to be really close. You should get to know them. You should not join hands with someone to launch a company at a lark. No, should spend a lot of time getting to know them. Just like I would say, it's the same advice for getting married. Spend a lot of time, date a lot, get to know each other, well before you take that plunge. So then only will you get some feel. But there's no guarantee. But it's definitely better than the interviews we do at work. And some of the best companies, they do people say 10 interviews, 7 interviews. Why? They're just trying to get to know you better. And they've done it very well. They have a very good structure, whether it's a McKinsey or a Levers or many firms, they really go through the grind. We try to get for any senior hire about 5, 6 people meet them. And anyone has the power of veto, but that's still one interview. I think here you have to go beyond. It's not like 1 hour. You should be spending tons of time on your business idea and you'll get to know if you're on the same page or not. It may not be identical, so it may not be like 100% match, but at least the overlap is pretty good.
So Aviraj Basu has a question for you, which it's a little more of what we have been talking about. So I've decided to take it now. He's saying, what conditions must be considered to choose a perfect business partner besides having the same values? So when you're saying get to know a person, I
Yeah.
mean, what would you look for? What are those values, and what would be those? Um, what would you really look for in a person?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Aviraj. And like I said before, but I'll just kind of reiterate it here. So, what values is one? We've spoken enough about that. Complementary skills. So, your complementary skill set is very important. Let's say you want to build a business on the internet, technology, or internet broadly. You definitely need one person who is very strong in on the tech side. It could be you or it could be the other person. It's hard when you have neither. In our case, we didn't have a technologist, and therefore I say I regret being not being in a computer engineer. So we went through many CTOs, and knock on wood, now we have been very stable for a while. So, but it's much better if one of you has that skill. You look at some of the best startups around. I think one of them will be a technologist. So everything technology will end with you, your final decision. So that means pure programming, before that product, before that maybe even design. On the other side, the complementary skills, you need someone who's strong in business, right? So you need someone who's strong on finance, someone who has a head for marketing, someone who can overall approach the investors, the market. So that's a very nice complementarity. It's never always so perfect. So you'll always have some overlap. Like in many companies, you'll see around, you'll hear of one founder, but the other co-founder, you know there are two co-founders, but you'll only see one. The other one is very busy running the company. And that's they are both comfortable with it. Some people are not extroverts, so they don't want to go in front of investors or media or whatever. Smart investors will say, we want to meet the whole team. They will meet them. But otherwise, from day-to-day basis, you'll have one person who's typically market facing, as we call it, and you'll have the other person who's inward facing. That's very important too. So, and then what about people? The most important thing that you manage internally is your people. There, you probably both have to manage people in your departments. So one person will manage everyone technology, and you will hire someone who tomorrow will be a head of technology, day after will be a CTO. That's important, and they will then take care of their cadres. And similarly, you will hire at some point of time a head of marketing, a head of finance, and then they'll grow as the organization grows. But initially, I would look at complementary skills and similar value systems.
So success came and came in plenty. I have two questions here. How did you cope with this success? And what does it actually mean to you?
Okay. So success didn't come that easily. I think we probably could count ourselves be properly successful only in 2010 when we IPO'd. So August 2010, we IPO'd on NASDAQ. I think that was definitely fair to call that successful. It was a very successful IPO, did very well. First 5 years, yeah, small successes. Site launched quite fast, team built, did well, getting traction. But like I said, 2001, 2005, no success, just survival. 2005, we managed to get our first proper round of institutional finance, $9 million from state partners. You can count that as limited success. From 2005 to 2010, we grew dramatically. We grew 25x in that period. We were profitable. We managed to IPO. So that was really a very good time. Um, I think that's where the value systems with which you're brought up and you grow matter. I can't say one bears success as likely as one should, because actually what happens is all your learnings happen during failure, not during success. So when you're succeeding, you typically have your head up in the clouds and you're like saying, whatever, everything's great. You're just taking in the moment. I think the trick is to recover from that quickly, to come down to Mother Earth quickly, and to hit the ground because there's the next challenge. So I'll give you a great example. An IPO is a great financial milestone, but it is an end game for the founders. It's great for investors. They get a chance to exit and they can, do very well through that. But for the founders, it is base camp. So let's build a metaphor of mountaineering and mountain climbing. It's just base camp. Yes, you hit a certain base camp and then you're going ahead. It gives you access to public money. It puts your currency, your stock suddenly is liquid currency. You can use that. You can raise more money easily. You can attract a lot more talent. But it's just a stage. So I think you have to see it in context of where do you want to go. So what success means to me is, I think we're still on the journey. I'd love for the company and the brand to stand for something where every customer is a brand ambassador. Everyone who deals with the brand is at the minimum satisfied, but hopefully very happy and delighted, and therefore is happy to recommend the brand to others. And I think there's certain brands who enjoy that today. So if you think of a brand like Apple, I think that's the kind of brand love it enjoys today. Or you think of a brand like Nike, or you think of some of these brands, they enjoy that brand love. That's where we have to go. And that for me would be true success. But yeah, it's very important to get stepping stones on the way to that success.
So, Deep, you faced an unprecedented situation when the COVID pandemic hit us all. I think it hurt the travel and tourism industry the most. I remember watching one of your interviews where you had half jokingly said that it wasn't an earnings call for MMT, but that it was a no earnings call for that quarter. I mean, that really stuck with me. So, how did you and your staff face this challenge? Because there must have been times where, when you saw profits, your revenue coming down to what, 90 something percent, by 90 something percent. How did you manage to keep up the morale of your people in those very difficult times? And did you need to lay off staff? Because that's probably the most challenging thing an entrepreneur can ever face.
Absolutely, Rekha. So you are right. COVID was unprecedented, but maybe the crisis of the dot-com bust and maybe the crisis of being bootstrapped with no money somewhere prepared us and also kind of hardened you. Like, I still feel the tougher crisis was way back then, because then it was existentialism crisis. Will we survive?
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't have that fear now because we had a solid balance sheet. We had $150 million in our balance sheet. We had to cut our costs. We had to come down. But I knew we will survive, even if this goes on 2 years. And that's why we took very harsh measures. We said, who knows how long it'll go on. And even now, it's not over, right? And someone
True.
just posted on the chat, travel and tourism has truly been completely devastated because the very nature of travel and tourism is to be move around and get people, which is not allowed. To give you an example, April, May, and June, the quarter that we reported, the first financial quarter, 2 months were in full lockdown, April and May, and June was just limping out. That's when I commented, this is a lack of earnings call, not an earnings call.
Yeah.
We were down 95.5%. Our revenues were wiped, obliterated is the word, completely. There was no revenue left. But we managed. What we had said was we will manage what we can manage, which is costs. So we came down drastically. We cut all our variable costs, particularly marketing, because we said if people aren't traveling, why should we market? Semi-fixed costs. We looked at our outsourcing costs, cut that. We looked at our hosting cost of our sites and servers, we cut that. And finally, we went into fixed costs. We actually asked all senior management to take cuts. Rajesh and myself took a 100% cut again, which was now much easier than it was way back then for almost 6 months. Our leadership team took a 50% cut down to manager level where they took a 10% cut. And, I owe you to my people who took those cuts. The idea was we don't have to lay off. Sadly, 2 months into the crisis, we realized two things. One is it's going on and on and on. It's not getting over. Remember, we all hoped it'll get over quickly, but it wasn't. Secondly, a lot of our very smart guys, particularly tech and product guys, are industry agnostic. They were being lured away by competition. So they were being lured away by non-travel online sectors who were booming. Whether it was Google or Amazon or food delivery or whatever, they were booming. They were luring away these people. And while no one will admit they left because their salaries been cut, but that hurts. So I wanted to restore their salaries. I figured we are being unfair to them. Also, at the same time, we realized some parts of the business will take very long to come back. The international travel. Just see, even today, it's virtually non-existent. MICE travel, which is meeting incentive conferences. So we did have to fine tune. We did actually have to let go of 10% of our people only once and not again. And I can tell you, hand on heart, it is the worst and the toughest decision to make. It's horrible for the person who receives it,
Yeah.
but it's also horrible for someone meeting it out. And only when you've asked one person to go, you can imagine how tough it is to ask almost 300 people to
It's
go.
heartbreaking. It's
It's
absolutely
heartbreaking,
heartbreaking.
sleepless nights. We tried to do it in the nicest possible way. We gave them the full year for them and their family to get medical coverage from us. We gave the laptops and the mobiles. For anyone who had worked longer than a few years, we gave more ex gratia. And so much so, both Rajesh and I actually helped a lot of these long-serving folks personally too, because it's hard. And only if we, could get them back, could we have actually redeemed ourselves. And hopefully we will when things get back. Those lines of business get back, but it's been very hard. So I hope no one has to do it. The lesson there, think twice, think thrice before hiring more people during good times, because you never know when tough times will come. So other expenses are easy to cut because they're not linked to people directly. But when it's linked to people, think very hard. It's very easy to ramp up, but very painful to ramp down. So lots of learnings for me through this. Yes, the fact that we've lived through tougher times, I think got us ready. But yeah, it's been challenging to say the least. I just want to complete the story. October, November, December, revenues came back about 38 to 40%, which is good. But we had controlled costs so much that we showed a profit during COVID, probably the only OTA in the world who did that. A cash profit of $9 million through COVID. And at the back of that, we managed to do another fundraise. So stocks at an all-time high. People are very hopeful. Travel will come back with a bang. Domestic travel people are traveling, notwithstanding the few new hotspots emerging in Maharashtra. But not, fair to say about 50% of domestic travel is back. And I think if vaccination drives doesn't slow down or rather picks up speed, I think another quarter, a lot of things will be behind us. We'll still have to travel with caution, which we should in crowded places. But I think people will be bolstered and emboldened with the vaccine and say, listen, now we can keep going forward. So
But do you think the pandemic also taught you new ways of working, apart from, of course, cutting costs? I was talking to Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo, and he was mentioning how, the tourist traffic has shifted from international travel to domestic travel, and how, cities and hotels which were hardly visited at times have now, they're going chock-a-block. And I have a question here also from Dr. Shubroto Chattopadhyay, who's asking something similar. I mean, has this pandemic been a way of changing how you've been working and bringing in new, you know, new ways for people to travel? So he's saying, will virtual simulation tours be a substitute? Is that a new way of traveling for people?
Yeah, no, great point. So firstly, absolutely, it's been game changing. The fact that we are working remotely and so efficiently itself, and just look at what you said. Normally you do this in person, you have so many people, suddenly you can open this out. So conferences, on the other hand, have changed the game. And, I know a bit about your organization. I know CII quite well. I know TIE very well. All organizations have adapted to this, and actually all of them have had bumper years, and because there's very little cost in this, but that's great. Similarly, we learned how to work remotely, which was great. We learned how to service our customers remotely, so a lot of work had to be done. A lot of our tech projects, which didn't get done with the day-to-day pressures, actually got done. The big, massive projects got attacked. So a lot of silver linings to this COVID cloud. I think it's also taught us that you can forever work in a hybrid way.
Yeah.
Many people now will be able to choose that, listen, maybe I'll come to work physically 3 days a week, but I'll work 2 days, and maybe there'll be adjustments, maybe there'll be comp adjustments, but there's savings to both. There's savings to the company on space. Space is very expensive. We gave up space, by the way. We've given up almost 1/3 of our space overall, and we think that's the right thing to do. And we'll figure when we need everyone to come back and how we will do it. The other COVID, silver lining is the advent and the mainstreaming, rather, of villas and apartments. This was something which wasn't mainstream. People still looked at hotels. They looked at some of them
Mm.
stuff like this. Now it's become mainstream. And we've got now 25,000 properties like this where you can choose a villa or an apartment over a hotel. People want spread out. The other thing for us is the premium business. The premium hotels have opened up in a massive way, given great deals because people want to be spread out like in a resort. Driving holidays is big, so therefore domestic has become huge. People are willing to drive out 10 hours to get to a remote place and be there. Workations. So many of my friends have gone up to the hills, have been in Goa for months, and are working up in a small cottage in the hills. And they're saying at least it's open air and fresh air
Yeah.
for long. So we all know people who can do that, have done that, who didn't have maybe any need. So I think it's been eye-opening for sure. And that's, I think, going to be the norm going forward. I think there's always going to be changes and we need to be fleet-footed and adapt. So adaptability has become an even more important skill set than it ever was. And people who have adapted to this are the ones you see positive even today, even if they're working from home. And people who haven't are the ones who are grumbling and mumbling. So the reality is, our fundraise. So we raised $230 million sitting at home, literally, as they say, with a shirt and a jacket on top and track pants below, and working on the clock. And look at the money we raised. Look at the money we saved. We
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
travel to 5 different cities. The first call was with Hong Kong. Then we moved westwards till the last call, middle of the night, was with SFO. So in 16 hours, we had met all our investors. And so there's a lot of lessons learned. And I think the goodness of this should be retained.
Deep, we have completely run out of time, but I will ask this one last question,
Oh,
which is, I think, which all of us really would like an answer to. How do you achieve the very elusive work-life balance, and how do you manage the stress which comes from running a large business? And then my
oh.
last question, what next for Deep Kalra, the person, and Deep Kalra, the entrepreneur?
Okay. So the first one is, let me tell you, anyone who's starting up a business, there is no work-life balance for the first many years. So be very clear about it. For first 5 years, like I say, there's no work-life balance. If you want to build something special, please be ready for a slog. I kid you not that for the first 4 years, when I say there was never a Saturday and most people took half Sunday off. So 6.5 days was the norm. People worked really hard. Almost my entire team had a toothbrush in office because they never knew when they'll be staying back in office, sleeping on the desk, under the desk, on the chair, whatever. So that was the norm. If you want to build something special, be ready for very, very, very long and hard days. It should be a labor of love, so it'll come automatically. If you think you can do it without that, no. Don't have the glamour picture when you get into entrepreneurship. Have the real deal. It is tough. Work life comes later, balance comes later, which is okay. I think I definitely learned that, and we have put that into play as you. I think as you grow up, as you mature, also as the company becomes more secure, you hire people, you can now delegate more, etc. So definitely one can do that. But I think as an entrepreneur, you should always be ready at any point of time to drop anything for work. There are no sacrosanct hours, and in many jobs too. I mean, in your job, Rekha, I know you're working around the clock at times. Sacrosanct hours. Maybe there's even more ownership. So let me put it very bluntly: the buck stops at you, right?
True.
So buck will stop at you as the founder when things are falling apart, etc. They will stop at you. Build a great team to whom you can give the credit when things are going down, and that can help in work-life balance. Be ready to genuinely delegate. Don't get people just for the title and then don't give them enough to do. So if you hire very good people and then second guess them, watch over their shoulders, micromanage them, they will leave. So if you hire very good people, hire them as mini entrepreneurs and give them the latitude to spread their wings and grow.
Toughest thing to do.
Yeah,
Let go.
to some it comes naturally, and I
Yeah.
again thank my background, training as well as work experience for that. Many people it doesn't come naturally because they believe they're the best to do everything. That's a challenge. If you want to do that, then you'll never have work-life balance, and be ready.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
be ready with that. Right now, I think there's a task still unfinished here, Rekha. Like I said, my definition of success for the company, we are still on the journey. So I'm still having fun, enjoying it. So I'm not really looking beyond, but yes, on the not-for-profit side, a lot of passion projects. So getting involved with whether there's an Ashoka, there's I Am Gurgaon. We have recently launched endowment fund for I Am Ahmedabad, my alma mater. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things going on, and that definitely helps. So I think if you can split up your time, maybe take out 5-10% time for your passion projects, that helps you.
Because you have suggestions in the chat that you need to do much more. And Shushmita had asked you if you had any plans to invest into e-commerce in the future to provide a one-stop shop for travel needs of your customers. But
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of angel investing also going on. I find it hard to look at companies one-on-one. So I go typically through funds, but I've found some very good startups where I have invested and I do try to help them from time to time. So that's part of it. But I think if you're still full-time with a job, it's very hard to balance that with investment.
true. Well, I've actually broken my own rule of staying completely on time by being almost 5 minutes over time. But Deep, that was a fascinating journey through many years. As you said, I've known you for a long time. I still have at least half my questions which are unanswered. So we'll have to have you back again. But I think the young people have probably, you know, got a lot from your journey, which will help them going forward. And it is chance encounters like the one with you today, which many of them are having, which has the potential of actually changing a lot of young lives and channeling them in the right direction. So, thanks so much for being with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Rekha. I really enjoyed it. And my very best to everyone who logged in. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.